Here's an interesting item. I'm going to bring it to you again because I just happened to come across it. Mentioned it before on the old program. If you missed it the first time, you get a treat the second time in some more detail. There's a British writer named J.B. Priestley. Now, this guy, J.B. Priestley, I know I'd read something by him years before. He was born in 1894. He wrote The Old Dark House, they made a terror film about it. And he wrote a story called The Grey Ones, Grey, The Grey Ones. And this story is published in the book that I have, in the book Hauntings, Tales of the Supernatural, edited by Henry Mazzeo, M-A-Z-Z-E-O. It's published by Doubleday. These, of course, are fiction stories. I picked this up from a book club when I was about 8 or 9 years old. Remember how you could write away and get 20 books for 10 cents? Well, this was one of them. And I'd never read this story till a couple years ago. And, of course, this is a story, folks, but I think a fiction story. And no, I'm not getting into the occult here. I hear a few of you out there saying, oh, my God, Piper's getting into that occult stuff again. I think he's trying to distract us. I think he's a Zionist agent. No, folks. I want to mention this to you, J.B. Priestley. Now, he was a pal, I guess, of George Orwell. He was part of a group of writers who have been mentioned as perhaps being, yes, anti-Semitic. It's kind of funny. If you look up J.B. Priestley on the Internet, you'll find a lot of references to him which suggest that he was your conventional liberal. After having read The Grey Ones, folks, I don't believe that he was. I'm going to give you just a couple quotations from the book that just really captured my attention. The character in the story, this is a story, not a book. The character in the story is a Mr. Patson, who's a businessman who started to become convinced that there's something wrong, and he decides to go to a psychiatrist. And he goes to a psychiatric partnership between Dr. Smith and Dr. Meyerstein. Well, it turns out Dr. Smith is the one who comes out to visit him. And it says here, if he had to explain himself to a psychiatrist, then he would much rather have one simply and comfortingly called Smith. In other words, Mr. Patson didn't want to meet Dr. Meyerstein. And that's obviously not an Irish name. Well, anyway, Mr. Patson tells his doctor that he believes there's kind of an evil principle in the universe, a sort of super devil that is working hard to ruin humanity. And it has its agents who must really be minor devils or demons living amongst humanity. And the doctor says, well, you know, the notion that this evil principle could have its agents among us might be very dangerous indeed. It could produce very serious antisocial effects. You realize that? Antisocial effects. As I was reading that, I was thinking, wait a minute, oh boy, this sounds like the argument against anti-Semitism, that, you know, if you suspect that there's a group in society that's doing something that shouldn't be done, and you suggest that that's demonic or satanic or just not nice, that would be very antisocial. Well, Mr. Patson, who's visiting the doctor, says that from what he understands, from what he's been told, and from what he's observed, this conspiracy, he doesn't use the term conspiracy, but that's just what he's saying, this conspiracy is to make mankind go the way the social insects went, to turn us into automatic creatures, mass beings without individuality, soulless machines of flesh and blood. They're trying to destroy the soul of humanity, to eliminate certain states of mind that belong essentially to the good, to wipe from the face of this earth all wonder, joy, deep feeling, the desire to create. to praise life. Now, Mr. Patson says that he'd been feeling for some time that things were going wrong and that somehow they seem to be out of our control, that while we're responsible for the sort of lives we lead, in actual practice, we find ourselves living more and more the kind of life we don't like. It's as if we were all compelled to send our washing to one huge sinister laundry, which returned everything with more and more color bleached out of it until it was all a dismal gray. Now, he goes on to say that this sinister force, this evil principle, and that's evil principle with a capital E and a capital P, he said they could control us in two ways. One, by a sort of remote control, perhaps by a sort of continuous radio program, never leaving our minds alone, telling us not to attempt anything new, to play safe, not to have any illusions, to keep to routine, nor to waste time and energy wondering and brooding and being fanciful. Notice he said that, a continuous radio program. Well, this story was written, I don't know, maybe after World War II. It was really before television, but a continuous radio program. Well, folks, that is exactly what we have. A continuous radio program coming from the Jewish media in many forms, whether we get it in television, whether it's cable television or network television, whether it's Hollywood, which Alex Jones says is controlled by the Arabs, or whether it's even plain old radio or internet radio, even, dare I say, Patriot radio. A sort of remote control, perhaps by a sort of continuous radio program, never leaving our minds alone. Well, that is what we do get. But anyway, he goes on to say, this is our character, Mr. Patson here. Now, obviously, if you have been paying attention to these words from this story, you realize that this story is actually reflecting what is happening on our world today. But Mr. Patson says that there was another way, direct control, you might call it, by a use of these agents, a sort of evil fifth column, with more and more of them everywhere, hard at work. Now, the psychiatrist, Dr. Smith, says, devils, demons, what? Well, Mr. Patson says, well, that's what they amount to, except that it gives one a wrong idea of them, horns and tails and that sort of thing. They're quite different. All you can definitely say is that they're not human. They don't belong to us. They don't like us. They are working against us. They have their orders, I would say from the Talmud, but that's another story. They have their orders. They know what they're doing. They work together in teams. They arrange to get jobs for one another, more and more influence and power. So what chance have we against them? Well, the story goes on and on, folks. Now listen to this. Mr. Patson says, when I talked about economies and politics and social changes just being used, that is, used by the bad guys, who he calls the gray ones, I felt all the time there was something behind them. If we're doing it for ourselves, it doesn't make sense. But the answer is, of course, that we're not doing it for ourselves. We're just being manipulated. In other words, folks, all these things that are happening, we think that we're doing them ourselves, but no, we're being manipulated to do them. He goes on. Take communism. The gray ones, as he calls them, the gray ones must have almost finished the job in some of these countries. They hardly need to bother anymore. All right, we don't like communism. We must make every possible effort to be ready to fight it. So what happens? More and more of the gray ones take over. This is their chance. So either way, they win and we lose. We're further along the road we never wanted to travel. In other words, what he's talking about here is that the gray ones created communism, and then the gray ones stoked up the war against communism. He talks about these people, the gray ones. They recognize each other and help each other, which makes it easy for them to handle us humans. They know exactly what they're up to. They receive and give orders. It's like having a whole well-disciplined secret army working against us. And our only possible chance now is to bring them out into the open and declare war on them. Well, isn't that what we've been talking about here in this program, ladies and gentlemen, fighting against the New World Order and directly naming the people and elements that are behind the New World Order, that the people we can spot, the organized groups that we know of that actually exist? Now, some people don't want to name those groups, and some people, and I understand why. But we are trying to bring them out into the open and declare war on them, as Mr. Patson said. And it's kind of funny, folks, and I'm going to wrap this up here in a minute. In this story, he talks about this group of gray ones getting together in the New Era Community Planning Association, the New Era. New World Order, get it, folks? They hold a meeting in a country house that's not too easy to get at. The New Era Community Planning Association. That sounds like the Bilderberg Group to me. Of course, they have many meetings. Anyway, folks, in the end, guess what? Turns out Dr. Smith and Dr. Meyenstein are part of the conspiracy, and they turn into evil bugs, and I guess that's the end of Mr. Patson. Now, there's an editorial comment going along with the story. It says the author has carefully erased everything that might give them a simple label. Likewise, he raises and dismisses politico-economic issues in favor of more subtle implications about the values and convictions of our time. Well, I would like to paraphrase the editor, Henry Mazzeo. I think what Mr. Mazzeo was saying was, well, J.B. Priestley obviously did not like Jews and considered them a very bad force in our society and carrying out an evil principle, acting as its agents, but he didn't want to say that directly, so he wrote his story in a veiled form of terror and science fiction. But anyway, it's an interesting story, can be found in Hauntings, Tales of the Supernatural, and probably other places. Folks, boy, oh boy, we've been here almost an hour, and I am going to wrap it up